today we are talking about complementary colors. So I just called this opposites attract, power of complementary colors. Um, and this really is going to apply to art in general. So yes, we're kind of talking about painting. I actually have some gouache tubes that I'm going to be using today with my primary colors, but this is kind of general rules for gouache, watercolor, acrylic, and even dry mediums like layering colored pencil, all that type of stuff. So today we'll look at kind of this little brief presentation on complementary colors, just to kind of give you a little bit of information. Then I'll do a demonstration on mixing. And then we'll do a little painting exercise, and depending on how much time we have, maybe we'll finish it together, or maybe it's something we can kind of start and I leave you with. We'll just kind of see where we're at. And then as always, I'll have time for question and answers too. So taking a look at complementary colors, generally speaking, these are pairs of colors that contrast with each other more than any color, and when placed side by side, they make each other look brighter. So if you look at the flowers there on the right, it is a little pixelated there, but you can get the general gist of the color combinations. You've got your violet and your yellow, your red and your green, and your blue and your orange. Those are kind of the basic, but we'll kind of get into more complementary colors in a minute. We also have something called split complementary colors, and this can be a really fun way to explore using complementary colors in your painting. And basically what that is, oops, I'll go back here. Basically what that is, if you, normally you would have red and green as a complement. So say red is going to be your kind of main color that you're keeping. So if you look at the color wheel on the lower right there, you'll notice instead of going directly across to green, because normally complementary colors are going to be across from each other on the color wheel. So that's also important to note, which when I do my live demonstration in a minute, I have a color wheel. So I'll sort of illustrate that point for you. But you can see when you go down to the green, instead of being on green, it's split. So then you're more into the yellow-green family and the blue-green family instead of that, you know, classic green. So if you look at the cover of the New Yorker here, you can see the artist, while there's other colors involved, is utilizing kind of these the split complementary color scheme in this art here. And then kind of taking a look at art history, there are complementary colors used throughout every time period of art. I kind of organize them at the top, but from the top, you can kind of see your red and green color schemes. In the middle, you've got your blue and your orange color schemes. And then at the bottom, your violet and your yellow. So I think it's nice to kind of look at art in this sense, because oftentimes, you know, if you hear, oh, red and green are complementary colors, well, I don't want my art to look like Christmas. You know, we tend to think that. Or, you know, sports teams often, you know, like the Denver Broncos are orange and blue. So we tend to kind of associate these color schemes together with what we see in pop culture sometimes. So I think it's good to take a look at art history and how these artists utilize these complementary colors. But then also when we get to mixing, we'll talk about variations of these colors. And that, I think that's a really important part. And you're not just necessarily going straight red next to straight green, but you're going to have some variation. So I just pulled this image to show you a little example. So this was done in watercolor, and it's a complementary color scheme using red and green. The green was mixed from blue and yellow. And this artist is utilizing both a cool red and a warm red with a cool green and a warm green. So this is something that as you're playing around with complements, I want you to take note of. Are you using warm colors or are you using cool colors? Now, it might take your eye a little bit to kind of train yourself to tell, is this cool or is this warm? Because oftentimes, you know, in school we learned, well, warm is red, yellow, and orange, and cool is blue, green, and purple. But really, we can have warm and cool of any color. So if you look closely, you'll kind of notice like the cool green almost has more of a bluish tinge to it, whereas the warm green has more of like a yellowish tone to it. So it has a warmer feel, but they're still both greens. So looking at this, this is kind of just a little graph showing you the complements, the kind of the three main pairs of complements as they kind of fade into each other. What you'll notice, if we look at, let's say, the orange and the blue one, just because it's in the middle, easy to see there. So we have our pure hue, the prismatic color in its pure form on either end. So we have that in orange, we have that in blue. Now, what you'll notice as you start to mix complements together, say I have a little orange and I bring a little blue into it, or vice versa, I have some blue and I bring some orange into it, you're going to get muted color, and then you're going to get something called a chromatic gray. And that's what happens when you mix complements together. They tone each other down, they mute each other, and you get to work with a whole new range of colors when you start to explore mixing complements together. I also want to just kind of mention, because I think this is helpful information to know, you can make brown from the three primary colors or by mixing two complements together. So a couple examples here. So if you take a look at green, which is made up of yellow and blue plus red, we make brown. And if you were in the skin tones class, you may remember I talked a little bit about some of this, but this is just kind of important to know too, because when you're working with complements in equal proportions, that it tones itself, or it tones those two colors down so much it becomes brown. So that's really what happens when you mix these colors together. And then I just wanted to pull this up too to show you it's not exclusive to just the primary colors and the secondary colors. You could do like a red, orange, and a turquoise could be complementary, or like an army green and a pink, a light blue and a caramel. So you can play around with these complements, and the more you kind of practice, you are going to kind of have a better understanding of how to find the complements. And I'll kind of show you that on the color wheel I have here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the slideshow here. If you have any questions before I get to the actual mixing component, feel free to, hop on and let me know. So let's go to, okay. So what I have here, and Susan and Lori, both of you have been in my classes more than once now, so you kind of know my basic supply setup. But today I am using gouache instead of acrylic. And the only reason I'm using gouache is because it's really, really, really forgiving for beginners when they're mixing, because it doesn't dry like acrylic does. So getting some gouache, even in so I've got a lemon yellow, a scarlet red, and an ultramarine blue. That's just what these three are called. It could say primary blue, primary red, primary yellow, whatever you have. But again, just keep in mind acrylics dry really fast. So that's why I like to practice mixing with gouache a lot. In fact, when I was in art college in Michigan, I took a whole color class, and that's where I was introduced to gouache. So it's really good for mixing and playing with color, but whatever you have is fine. Absolutely. So this color wheel, I actually just picked this up from Michael's. It was on clearance for just a couple dollars, and I liked it because it has these moving parts. So you can see, we've got our main color wheel, but on the back is really what we're talking about today, because it's our complementary and split complementary color wheel. So what I can do, and I'll kind of just show you, if I have this arrow here, I can pick whatever pure color I want. So right now my pure color is on red. So I can slide this, and now it's red-orange. Now it's orange. So wherever my little arrow and it says pure color, that's how I know kind of how to read this little chart. And then I have a tint, a tone, a shade. Again, a tint is with white, a tone is with gray, a shade is with black. But then you'll notice I've got a nice arrow guiding me to blue, which is my complementary color. But then I also have my split complementary color, which is going to show me and point to arrows for those too. So for orange, I would do blue, green, and blue, violet instead of straight blue. So then when I'm looking at my tints, tones, and shades, I can also find other pairs of complements. So if I was wanting to do, for example, like almost like a pink color, I know that maybe I could do like a minty green for its complement. So that's kind of why having something like this is nice. Because you're able to just have a little visual to kind of pick out your color schemes. And then we also have some other, I know we're not talking about these color schemes today, we're focusing on complementary, but we do have a triad and the tetrad, and so you can kind of play around with those too. So it's handy to have something like this when you're learning how to paint. And again, this little interactive wheel makes it really nice. So I've just got my watercolor paper here, and I've just got some palette paper. Just because I'm using gouache today, I'm actually just going to mix with my brushes, although you could mix with a palette knife if you wanted to. So I'm just going to start by laying out a little of each color. Gouache goes a really long way. I'm actually going to be teaching a class on getting started with gouache. So if you've never used it before, you're wanting to learn about it, you can sign up for that class. I actually didn't think I even liked watercolor when I was a teenager until I discovered gouache. And then that actually helped me kind of relearn to love watercolor. So I've got my 3 primary colors here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just mix my full color wheel a minute. So I've got all my colors. So when I'm mixing my color wheel, I always start with my lighter color first. And I'm not going to worry about my tertiary colors right now, like my yellow, green, and blue, purple, and those colors right now. I'm just going to focus on my primary and my secondary. Just keep it simple. So I'm first going to mix a little orange. So gouache is it's similar to watercolor, but I like it again because these colors, even if they appear to dry, are going to stay wet, or I can re-wet them and use them, whereas my acrylic paint can dry. So that's just one of the reasons I really like gouache. Grab a little bit more yellow. Make our blue, or add our blue in to make our green. And again, I always start with that lighter color first because you have more control over your paint. And sometimes gouache looks like it pools up like it's not there, but there's plenty of it there. All right, and then we need a little violet or purple, and then we'll be good to go. I think violet or purple tends to be the trickiest color to mix. But again, that's why I like gouache so much. I think it's really forgiving for beginners when you're starting to learn how to mix. All right, so I've got my 6 colors here. So let's just kind of take a look at bringing these colors into each other and what happens. And I do have some nice fresh water. Too, I'd say, make sure you're changing out your water often if it's starting to look muddy so your colors are staying nice and pure. So we're going to do kind of a little red. Start with a little red over here. And gouache, again, is nice because you can paint it really thick or you can paint it really thin. So you know what I might do? I might have a brush for each color. That might make my water last a little longer. Okay, I've got some green. Okay. So I'm going to do all my primaries on this side. I'll do all my secondaries on this side. Got our yellow. to our violet. Looks like I might need to make a little bit more that color. There we go. So the reason I'm spacing them out like this is we're going to start mixing them into each other so that we can kind of explore what starts to happen when we mix our complements together. Okay, so next step, I've got my blue. All right, and then let's use this brush. My orange. Same thing, I just didn't mix as much as I needed. I'm actually, this particular brand of paint, this Arteza brand, this is actually the first time I'm using it. So far I'm liking it, but I'm just learning how much paint I actually need to mix. All right, there we go, that looks good. I could probably add a little bit more green up here too. Okay, I'm gonna just add a little bit more green a minute. Grab some yellow. And then we'll be good. There we go. Much better. We just want some paint to actually work with. Okay, so I've got all my brushes, all my colors. If I want, we can do a labeling. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of mix a little scale. So what's going to happen over here is we're going to start with red, and we're going to slowly add just a little bit of green into it. When we get to the middle, it's going to be like a 50-50% mixture. So your chromatic gray, that's going to be the red plus the green in equal proportions. And then we'll do the same with all these, just to kind of see this range that we can create with complementary colors. So to start, I am going to pull, just kind of make a separate little pile of red here. So then I have red for my green. And you may have to mix more colors as you go. That's just, you know, part of painting for sure. And then what I'll do is just grab just a little bit of green. And then I'm going to mix that in with my red. So what you'll notice, I'll go ahead and lace them out here. Okay, so there's my first little bit with green. Now there's a little bit more water in here, and sometimes I will say it's hard to truly see the colors, and Susan, we were just talking about this, but sometimes it's hard to truly see the colors until they're dry. So just know some of these variations are going to be really subtle, but that's part of the experimenting. And sometimes you want a subtle variation, so that's good. But I can then now, you know, add some more green to this. This is a great way to start to darken a color or take away the intensity of a color, lower the intensity of a color without adding black. So this is a way you can do it without adding any black, just by using a complement. So maybe I'll come in at the other side now. Do need a little bit more green. And then we'll go with our 50-50. So take a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue. Let's my green back up. Again, just separate some of that so I've got some more to work with. And then I can take some of my red this time and mix that into my green. And I can start painting that over here. And now really you can see, as you can imagine, you could have a really big scale of tons of different swatches too, of course. This is kind of just showing you how to go about it to start. But keep in mind, you know, you can do tons of little swatches and you can really lay out your paper any way you want. You know, it doesn't have to be like this. You could just do, you know, little swatches, however you like to paint is totally fine. So I'm going to grab a little bit more red. Let's go a little bit more dramatic so we don't have a ton of space. Actually, this is probably our 50-50 mixture. So what I'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and put this here, because that's pretty much the brown. Okay, so in the middle, and I can even label that, this will be the 50-50 ratio. So then what I can do is I can just bring more green to this to go on this side. Sometimes you're going to find red sometimes will just overpower things. So it's okay if you have to go back in and add more green to it. I'll just go reverse instead. That's okay. You know, it's all part of kind of the learning with mixing is it's, you know, it's never the same, which is I think why I like it so much. Go ahead and mix a little bit more green in here. Grab a little bit from here. There we go, that looks good. All right, so again, when this dries, you're going to see some of the colors better, but here I've got a whole range of different colors just by mixing two complementary colors together. Now, the other thing I want to mention is this is just one type of red and yellow and blue. So imagine if you grab a different type of red with a different type of green, you're going to create a whole new range of colors. So keep in mind, you can play around with your initial mixtures. This is just keeping it super basic from the tube for the sake of the demonstration. But have fun playing around with the different combinations, because that's how you get really good at mixing colors. And then when you're painting something, you know how to get a color you're looking for. And that's a really exciting thing to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at yellow with violet. So I'm just going to isolate a little yellow. Now, as you can imagine, because yellow is so light, you don't need much violet to start. So I usually start pretty subtle with that violet. But here's what I'll say is when you're mixing yellows, if you've ever struggled with darkening a yellow by trying to mix black into it and you just create a muddy mess, this is your solution. Just mix purple or violet in with your yellow, and I mean, already notice I can start to have control and darken my yellows. Okay, so we'll do the same kind of process where we'll just mix some of the complements together in different variations, and then we'll do kind of a 50-50 mixture in the middle, which again is that chromatic gray. And yes, that's how you mix brown, but keep in mind, brown sometimes matters with what colors you're starting with. So sometimes if you grab like a different style blue, you're going to get different results. So again, that's why playing around with the colors is so important. Sometimes what I'll do when I'm making little swatches like this is I'll label which red, which yellow, which blue I'm using. So when I come back and look at swatches or how did I make that color, you know, it's an easy way to remember. All right, so we'll start going in from this other side a little bit. Well, actually, take that back. We'll do a little bit more purple. So this is about our 50-50. Now this is a little bit more watery than up here, but again, gouache, you can paint like watercolor or like acrylic. So that's kind of the advantage of it. But now I've got more of that kind of brown color. Okay, so then we'll kind of transition with some violets. We'll add some yellow into that and we'll go the opposite direction. All right, let's see. Do need to mix a little bit more violet a minute. And two, if you notice your colors aren't mixing right, again, always check to make sure they're not muddy, make sure your brush is clean, make sure your water's clean. Just all those little tips will help you get nice, beautiful, clean colors. So I notice you know, beginner painters sometimes forget about those little things. At least that's what I notice with my students. They'll forget to change out their water. Right, so I have my violet here, so now I'm adding a little bit of yellow into it. Okay. And actually probably I added more yellow than I needed to, but again, I'm just kind of demonstrating and showing you kind of some of the different ranges. So I mean, you can play around with just a touch of yellow versus more yellow and go from there, but maybe I want to bit of this purple into here. Let's see what we get here. There we go. Okay, so again, I can start to create a nice little range. So let's go ahead and we'll play with the blue and orange, and then we'll do kind of a little activity, kind of putting these together. So blue, let's kind of isolate some of it over here. So blue and orange, I can just, again, this is why I like gouache so much, is even though this is dry on here, I can actually just with a little water, I can pull this orange up to mix with my blue. So with acrylic, I couldn't do that. So in turn, you use a lot less paint when you're painting with gouache than you would with acrylic. So this is how I'm going to get some of those, you know, kind of muted, more midnight blues. And again, some of, you know, what I actually have on my paper versus what you see on the screen. I know colors sometimes get a little distorted, but that's why I think it's so powerful to just try this on your own, because you can start to see it transform right in front of you. And you start to have a lot more control over colors when you start playing around with mixing color. And that's a pretty nice blue. Again, you're seeing kind of a range because this is thicker where this is more transparent. So the texture is not quite the same, or the surface quality is not the same, but you can still get the sense of the color. All right, let's go for a little orange, and then we'll do our 50% mixture. I am gonna isolate a little orange here. Red. Bring that in. Okay, so now that I've got my orange, I can take just a teensy bit of blue and bring that in. And if you feel like you don't get enough the first time, you can always add a little bit more. Keep in mind, it's all experimentation in the beginning, because doing these kind of exercises is just going to help improve your overall skills. So there I get kind of like a nice darker orange. That's looking good. Looks a little bit more blue in there. So again, it's a way to darken a color. It's a way to lower intensity of a color. Thinking about if you're painting flowers or trees or skies, knowing mixing complements together can create those nice, subtle, beautiful variations too. All right, so now kind of our 50% mixture. I'm just kind of mixing what I had here. I'm getting a nice brown. Actually, I think this is my favorite brown I got. So you'll notice that too, is you'll probably have like a favorite brown, and then that can kind of be your go-to when you're mixing brown. So there we kind of have like a nice little scale ranging from red to green, yellow to violet, blue to orange. And like I said, you could have 50 little squares in between each of these if you wanted to. It's really how much you want to kind of play around with it, but this is kind of the general idea of how to actually mix it. So what I want to do now, so we have a little bit of time here, is just kind of give you a little activity to try. This is a super basic kind of project that almost every art school will have their students do in a color class. So, and it's just kind of, it's laying out the complementary colors, kind of what we've already talked about, but seeing them actually interact. So this is less mixing at first and just more so kind of letting them interact and giving ourselves like this little guide that we can have in our sketchbook. But then you can kind of play around with your mixing like on a sheet like this. So all I'm going to do is 6 boxes. Now I'm just going to freehand these because, you know, that's okay. I kind of like the looseness of the freehanding sometimes, but you could absolutely use a stencil if you have it, or a ruler or straight edge if you're feeling like you want it to be more straight and even. So I'm going to do my second row right down here. Okay. My third box on the second row. All right, so just some little boxes like that. And then in each box, I'm going to do a little circle. You may have even seen something like this before. I think this is kind of a fun little exercise to do when you're exploring complementary colors. And I definitely did this when I was in art school. Okay, so again, my circles, they're not perfect. That's okay. You could trace something if you wanted to. That's kind of up to you. So what we're going to do is we'll kind of do, each square will be a different color. So we'll go yellow, blue, orange, purple, red, blue. Maybe I said it backwards, but I'm getting them confused. But we'll get all the colors on there. But each background will be one of the 6 colors. So I'll start this one. I've got my red looks good, so I'll go ahead and use some red to start. So just know if this background will be red, then this one will be green because we'll put the pairs next to each other. And you can use any kind of brush. Flats work good. I'm using a Filbert right now. And you don't have to worry about it being too perfect, but I do kind of just follow my little edges. But again, you can do this in any type of paint. You can also do this with colored pencils, with markers, you can, anything. In fact, you might even want to do one for all the different mediums you like to work in. And you don't even have to worry about if your edges are super perfect or anything like that. You know, that's really a matter of preference. Okay, so there's my red. I will have to mix some more colors a minute. Do green in my background over here. Try a little bit more water in. Doing these little exercises, I think, can be like a really relaxing thing to do as well, because I think it helps you get to understand your material and experiment with brushes as well, in addition to just applying this flat application of paint, you know, and not really worrying about painting something. But yeah, exercises and little things like this. I definitely will be doing some more classes with just little exercises to help you feel more comfortable and just practice skills, because I think that's just a really good thing to do. Now it's kind of up to you. You can at this point, after I get this done, I could go ahead and put my green square up, or my green circle in the red square now if I wanted to, or I could go ahead and paint all my backgrounds. It really doesn't matter. I mean, if you're using acrylic, sometimes it might be nice to just go ahead and put that green circle in a minute so you can be done with the green and don't have to worry about drying. So I can go ahead and just do that in a minute. Again, it's okay if it's not totally perfect. I am using a flat brush right now, but a round paintbrush, like a small to medium round, is really good for painting little circles like this. Okay, so there's my green. Then I'm gonna go back, I'll go ahead and do the same thing with my red. Let's get a little bit more red. Bring some red in there. It's really fun to kind of see these pop like this though. Okay. So again, these are wet still. As they dry, the color is going to look even better. But let's go ahead, we'll do our next two. Let's see. We'll do, go ahead, I'm gonna make purple. Trying to use up what colors I have wet a minute before I make anything new. Okay. Let's see. Start that over. It's looking a little muddy. Part of it's my water is starting to get a little dirty on me. A little bit more blue over. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna have all my secondary colors fall on the bottom and my primaries on the top. I mean, it doesn't really matter how you organize it though. You can see flat paintbrushes are really nice for painting little squares like this because you can just naturally use the brush kind of to follow the edge and then fill in. This edge. Again, sometimes around the circles, though, rounds can be helpful. Bring that down. And you know, if you're painting with watercolor or gouache, it's okay if it's thinned out with water. That's absolutely fine. All right, let's see. For some yellow for my next background. Kind of move my palette around. I've got some clean areas over here. I always try to use as much of it as I can before I move on. Just want to clean my brush off real good too. Okay, so I've got my yellow. Go ahead, paint that on. Got something there. There we go. So the yellow almost looks like it's a highlighter in the camera. Looks a lot brighter on the screen than it is here. Right, and then I can go ahead and fill in my yellow circle down here. go. Again, these flats aren't the easiest for painting circles, but just for sake of not having to clean off my brush since my water is already kind of muddy. Then I'll go back to my violet here. Fill that in up here. Again, I'm stretching this one out a little bit with some water, but that's okay. Still get the idea. All right, and our final two. Start with some blue, and then we'll get our orange in there. So again, I'll do blue up here because blue's primary. Kind of paint around. All right, so there's my blue. Then I'll need to make a little bit more orange here. Orange is, I feel like, one of the most satisfying colors to mix. I don't know, it's just so pretty and happy. Go ahead and paint this in. Again, I'm not worrying about staying in my lines too much. I mean, really, you could even freehand this and not draw it at all. I just thought for the sake of the demonstration, sometimes it's easier to kind of have some lines to paint in. Go. Cool, got my orange. All right, and then I can bring my orange up here. And my blue down here. And again, if I was, taking my time, I am actually a pretty slow painter when I'm, painting for myself, not a demonstration. So sometimes, for a demonstration, I'll just kind of not worry about making it look too perfect because otherwise it'd take a long time. So there we go. So now when this dries already, this is looking pretty good here. These still have to dry up a little bit, but this can kind of just, already I can see that next to this purple or violet, this makes this yellow appear so much brighter. So they really kind of play with each other. And again, it is tricky to see on the screen, but I think when you do a little exercise like this, you see it happen before your eyes, and it's a pretty powerful thing. And I think you really start to understand how complements work so well together. And then you could take this kind of a step further, and you could maybe, let's say, try some similar ideas with some like pink and mint green, or kind of like that kind of muted blue and kind of a tannish color, kind of play on blue and orange. So you can try variations of these now that you kind of have this basic understanding of how I place complements together. Another kind of fun way to practice this, I think fruit makes a really great example. You could, for example, and you could even find images online to print and sort of trace around or transfer if you don't feel comfortable freehand drawing them. But for example, a slice of an orange and kind of trying to paint the orange and then maybe paint a blue tablecloth. But you could kind of do variations of the oranges and the blue so it's not exactly like this. Or, maybe you're painting a banana and there's sort of a muted kind of purple in the background, or an apple and there's green in the background, or it's a green apple with red in the background. So you could sort of kind of play with painting with complementary colors in that way. And that's a really, really fun way to get started. So that's about all I have for demonstration.